Tell that joke when you gave us the.
Yes.
Or will you just leave? There we go. I can hear it now. Yeah. I heard it was so cold in Washington DC this winter that politicians were putting their hands in their own pockets. I don't think there's any group that joke doesn't work on. Always appropriate. Okay, well, characters as archetypes. I hesitated in naming this and even saying what I wanted to talk about, but I really love this subject a lot because I think it's underutilized and underexplored, especially in Christian circles. And one of the problems is the word archetype. I think we're like, look at that word and we're not quite sure what it means or what it's for or why it matters or how we should use it. There are actually archetypes in the Bible. And I'm going to try to explain why archetypes matter and how you can use them in producing stories, whether those are novels or films or whatever. But I'm not coming at this from the position of, I'm not claiming to be a psychologist. So some of the exploration of this has been in psychology, and that's not my area. I'm not saying psychologists are wrong. I'm saying I think that because of the work of the psychologist Jung and this guy named Joseph Campbell, anybody ever heard of Joseph Campbell, the hero of 1,000 Faces? You guys are familiar with that? He was big into Jung, and so he kind of developed his ideas around archetypal patterns in mythology. And he was interviewed by Bill Moyers, I think probably 30 years ago, something like that. And I recently read the book that they did. There was a transcript of the interview called The Power of Myth. And he was asked, so Joseph Campbell was asked by Bill Moyers, so where do archetypes come from? And he said, they come from our internal organs. That's a line that I feel you guys kind of want to laugh, and you don't know whether it's serious or not. It's serious. If you don't have a grounding for reality, if you don't know what stories are ultimately pointing to, if you don't believe in ultimate meaning, and yet you're really fascinated with myths, you're going to have to have a grounding for archetypes, all right? And if you can't say they come from ultimate truth, they come from God, they come from our, I don't know, even in a non-Christian sense, just some kind of ultimate our source, you're going to have to go back to Darwinism and say, well, there must be an evolutionary explanation. So before we were fully developed as human beings, somehow our brains and our kidneys, whatever, like wicked stepmother. So if I sound like I'm mocking that idea, I'm more saying I'm not coming from that position. So this is not what I'm trying to do. When I was in graduate school studying creative writing at the University of Kansas, I mentioned this earlier, I think, Jim Gunn, maybe the award-winning science fiction writer, he would say, Dan, you can't tell a story about a gun. You can tell a story about a man with a gun. In other words, all stories are about people. And people are so necessary to stories that if your story doesn't begin with someone and explore someone, it's probably not going to be understood at any depth as a story. When you were young, we started out liking, at least as a boy, I liked action way better than I liked character stuff. And as I've gotten older, I've realized that people are infinitely complex. And we're probably going to be fascinated with God. I know we're going to be fascinated with God forever. I think people are also going to be the subjects of intense interest because we are made in God's image. And so people are more interesting than things. This is a way of saying this. Things can be interesting, but people are more interesting than things. And so stories are at heart human in nature, right? So I don't want to be too abstract with this. You need a connection to the audience as a storyteller. So let me give you some terms here. I believe that everybody in this room has a deck of cards in your mind that you have. It's not like you're hardwired with those cards, but through immersion in stories, you have encountered certain archetypes over and over and over again, and it's an unconscious thing. These archetypes are now in your brain so deeply that when you see the same pattern as the archetype that's there, you recognize it subconsciously and you're drawn towards it. Okay, so archetypes are essentially universal and internal. You have a deck of cards. I'm going to show you in this talk some of the cards that you have and stories that created those cards and that pull from those cards. Stereotypes and archetypes are not the same thing. A stereotype is particular and external, which means that they are essentially lazy classifications based on external. They are all like this. All lawyers are greedy liars. Stereotype, correct? Wait, what? Someone said amen. I don't know. Well, they're all archetypes say we are like this, not they are like this. So an archetype would say, where do we find unexpected greed and dishonesty? And it wouldn't necessarily be in a lawyer. It could be, but the archetype is actually the unexpected thing there. Tropes are recurring patterns that appeal to the familiar without enlightening the audience. And that doesn't mean a trope can never have any enlightening element to it. It's just you can have tropes that don't do anything really to reveal something for us. So for instance, in a Western, if I said, picture like a generic Western, and I said, what are the saloon doors going to be doing this? Right? Are we going to have some kind of showdown in the street where we hear the spurs? One person on one side, one person on the other. Are the townspeople going to be kind of scurrying away from the danger zone? What about the cowboys being chased by Indians, or the stagecoach being chased by Indians? Technology comes into this. We have trains on one side. We have horses on the other. We have bow and arrow on one side, we have guns on the other. Tropes. Now those tropes can be made to serve a higher purpose. Westerns often will say, they're basically exploring the idea, what's the difference between civilization and barbarism? Is it technology, or is it something else? Right. So often, the way Westerns developed, they started out with civilization being on the side of the technologically more advanced. And then as that idea became stereotypical, they are like this, they are like this, that got flipped on its head and explored the idea, well, if the defining aspect of civilization is justice, where does justice come from? The lone sheriff in the town, who is the embodiment of justice, or supposed to be, is going to face off against a gang of outlaws. Does that make sense? Or maybe that gets turned on its head, and the sheriff is actually working for the land barons, and he actually represents the opposite of justice. And you need someone like Shane, the former outlaw, who's trying to turn his life around, who brings justice against the system. Does this make sense? So tropes are useful. The Bible actually has tropes. I don't have time to go into this, but it's fascinating. The idea of a betrothal at a well recurs in the Bible. It's really, really interesting typologically. But that's just a teaser. Caricatures. Caricatures are patterns that categorize by exaggeration without enlightening the audience. So you get like shushing librarians. Anybody been in a library recently and had a librarian shush you? You have? I don't think they do it as much. I mean, the libraries that I've been to, they never shush people. There's talking areas. And how about the country club snob wearing the sweater all around? This is something that happens a lot in cozy mysteries. My wife likes cozy mysteries. I don't like them, but I will watch them to be around her. So, how about the brainy professor who's wearing a bow tie? Right? It's a caricature. He's never going to not be the brainy professor who's slightly elevated in speech and slightly condescending, right? I think you can see a culture's biases in what is okay to caricature. Like in the 1980s, the computer nerd was a complete outcast. And you're supposed to, in the audience, kind of despise the computer nerd. Now, the computer nerds are the ones with all the power. Right? So the caricature has changed. But what I want to talk about is story archetypes. And again, I'm not talking about Jungian psychology. So what is an archetype? What am I saying it is? I'm saying that an archetype is a pattern of insight into human nature. This is one of the reasons we create stories, and it's one of the reasons we love stories, because they give us insight into human nature. I don't believe that they come from our internal organs. I believe that they are an aspect of the language of story in a really basic form that crosses cultures and crosses time. And they work because they're a reversal of our expectations that is a mirror of what happens in life. All of us probably have the experience of wearing masks. It is necessary in the modern world to wear masks. Sadly, it is necessary, right? You go to church and you have a church mask. I'm not saying that's a good thing. I'm saying I bet everybody in here has a church mask. Maybe you work hard not to wear it, but you've learned, maybe through some bad experiences, you can't be completely yourself when you go to church, or when you go to your job, or when you go to school. Again, not necessarily a good thing, but we put on masks. And one reason we do it is because as human beings, our fantastically complex brains are amazingly suited to help us navigate life. You walk into a room and your brain is dealing with intense amounts of input from all your senses. And it's categorizing really quickly, and it's putting things into boxes like, what's the environment here? Is there any danger? What's the social danger? You're not thinking all this consciously. You're actually just thinking room, seats, lecture, friend. Haven't seen that person in a while, right? Okay, so that means that when you encounter people, you have this human tendency to put them into a box. First impressions matter, correct? It's because you and I and everybody else on planet Earth, when we meet someone, we put them into a box unconsciously. They go in this box. And then in order for them to become human, they have to get out of that box. That means they have to show that they don't belong in that box. I try really hard in my classes to keep my students incapable of putting me in a box. I say, like to myself, I want them to put me in their junk drawer. Where they just don't know where I belong. Right? You have a junk drawer at home. Where do you belong? So the idea behind this is that when we get to know someone as a human, it's because they've done something unexpected. They've acted not contrary to their own nature, but contrary to the nature of the box that I put them in. I put them in the reverend box. I put them in the country club snob box. I put them in the lying lawyer box. And they got out of that box by doing something. Wait, that lawyer just told me the truth. Wow, I've never seen that before. That pastor just told me something that doesn't seem very pastoral. But it might be very true. Wow. So what happens is we put them in a little, they become human to us. Now, writers have known this for a long time. Journalists in particular are really good at using this idea in order to manipulate readers. H.L. Mencken, the kind of famous journalist from the Baltimore Sun back in the 1920s who covered the Scopes monkey trial, ardent humanist, just despised the church, just seemed to despise Jesus and anything Christian. He wrote a piece about how the difficult lesson he had to learn to become a journalist. He didn't want to learn this lesson. But all the older journalists told him, this is the only thing you need to learn to be a successful journalist. What you need to learn is that all journalism is about creating a villain in the public square and then executing him publicly. That's what journalism is. So in order to do that, journalists will sometimes create a hero so that they can remove the mask publicly and say the hero's a villain. Right? So they build up a person and then go, look, and because we get the impression that the second thing is the removing of the mask, we think this must be the human thing. Here's the human thing, the mask is coming off. Sometimes that's not the real mask. That's just the journalist's portrayal of the mask, right? Now, I'm not throwing all journalists under the bus. I'm just trying to get across this idea that in stories, you have a limited space and you have to use techniques like this that mirror reality. In other words, the reality that we can't help having to be a little bit private, because if you're completely yourself in front of everybody, you're going to be rejected all the time. So you kind of have to have these strategies. So an archetype, in my opinion, is a juxtaposition of X and not X. It's humanity revealed through internal contradiction. If you get to know someone deeply enough, you will discover that they are a bucket of contradictions, right? Peter in the New Testament is a walking contradiction. It's one of the things that makes him human, right? I will never betray you. Yeah, before the rooster crows 3 times. Before the rooster crows, he will deny 3 times that he even know. And then later on, he's crucified upside down for the name of Jesus. Contradictions, we're all contradictions. It's one of the things that makes us human. So in a story sense, it's really, this is like a way of figuring out, how do I create characters that feel human to the audience? Well, you don't have to create a brand new character that feels human to the audience. Just say, what kind of story am I telling and what kind of people have they encountered? What contradictions do they recognize in people that are already part of their deck? They already have that in there somewhere. Personality traits are to characters what ideals are to plot. I haven't gone into ideals much in this, but basically things like maturity and intelligence and insecurity and autonomy, these are things that we recognize as part of the human experience. And so when you combine one of these with its opposite in a person, they start to come alive. They start to feel like we're seeing the mask and the not mask at the same time. So, in order for an archetype to feel human, it has to show us what humans are really like, meaning it has to be true. You don't want to just make up something that you have that isn't part of the deck, so to speak. It also needs to be recognizable. Audiences need to be able to say, yes, that's what we are like. So, recognizable, relatable, true. Here's probably the most common card that you have in your mind. It's the everyman card. Now, let me show you the X and the not X in this. Humanity without specificity. Is that possible? Every human face in this room is different. So how do we get humanity without specificity? Well, think about Luke Skywalker, the picture of him, right? What's the point of putting Luke Skywalker? Why is Luke Skywalker crafted? Is he a deep character? We don't know. Vigorous no. He's not a deep character because the point of an everyman character is an invitation to the audience to project themselves onto the person who is a person without specificity, right? So you get Luke Skywalker, you get George Bailey, and It's a Wonderful Life. There's a reason he's an everyman character. Dorothy, the Wizard of Oz, an everyman character. She's fairly vanilla as a normal American girl of the time. How about the Pevensey children? And I love C.S. Lewis and the Chronicles of Narnia, but those children are not deeply drawn, and they're not deeply drawn on purpose. Lewis talks about it in his essays. It's intentional. So we have everyman, a character who stands in for the vicarious desires and expectations of the audience. That's one of the cards in your head that you're carrying around. You're also carrying around the know-it-all card. You recognize this guy? I told my wife I think he's the hero of the series, and she's like, don't say that publicly. So I keep doing it, The know-it-all, the guy who has knowledge without humility. Now, is it possible to have knowledge without humility? Have you met this person before? Does anybody here currently work with this person? Is anyone here this person? You're proud of it. It's not just him, it's, if you ever saw the old TV show, I like really kind of hate sitcoms. The only sitcoms I've ever watched regularly were MASH, back in those old days. I think I saw every episode of MASH. I think I watched the first 3 seasons of The Office during COVID, because my wife found, I think it was funny, but very, very different kind of sitcom to me. But Cliff Clavin in the Cheers sitcom, you remember Cliff? He was a know-it-all character. How about Dan Aykroyd in Ghostbusters? Anyone ever see Ghostbusters? I worked in a movie theater when that came out. We had it for 9.5 months. And every break I took had to be in the movie theater, so I memorized the script from Ghostbusters because every break I was listening to the film over and over again. So Dan Aykroyd's character says things like, what you have there is a classified free-roaming dangerous apparition and a real nasty one, too. That is the know-it-all character, and it's the same character as this guy. It's the same character as Barney Fife. Now, men, the bumbling authority. Authority without responsibility. Anyone work with this person? How about Principal Rooney in Ferris Bueller's Day Off? The authority without responsibility. Father Mulcahy in MASH. Any leader who is working for Darth Vader. One of my favorite archetypes, I wish I could spend more time on this one because this one is super fascinating to me, is the trickster character. And it's way older than, it appears in fairy tales. And there are psychological theories about this. I believe psychologists are using, there's this kind of idea that when your only tool is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And I'm not saying psychologists are wrong about everything. I'm saying I think that one reason that they're so adamant about certain things is because what they don't necessarily understand is the way the language of story is operating. And so they're missing the possibility that it is actually making a coherent statement, that these archetypes are there to teach us things that aren't obvious. So the trickster character is the jester who delights and horrifies by cleverness and guile rather than wisdom or prowess. And it's interesting because it's an embodiment of deception, but that deception comes in 2 forms. It's either deception without animosity. So it's deceiving as a kind of playful thing, and sometimes ignorant of the damage that deception is causing. Or it's deception without empathy. It doesn't care. And sometimes the trickster character morphs from one to the other. How different is the Joker character in the Batman franchise from Loki? Are they the same person? They're not the same person, not the same character, but the archetype is the same, right? It's the deception part that delights in that, and the consequences just add to the joke. They are part of the joke, right? Think about Jacob in the Old Testament. Jacob is the trickster archetype. He is born deceiver, heel grabber. And he deceives, and then over the course of his journey is deceived and is deceived. Until he reaches a climax where he wrestles with God by the river Jabbok, I believe. There's a pun in there in Hebrew, I'm told, with the Jacob and Jack and whatever the other third word is. But he wrestles with God, and he asks God's name. He wrestles with the angel of God. He says, "What's your name?" He's like, "Why do you guys?" Why? It's an attempt to control God. That God will not allow himself to be controlled, and he wrenches his hip. Right? You guys know the story. He walks with a limp the rest of his life, but he renames him. Right? He renames him, and he ceases to be the deceiver at that point. The moment he wrestles with God, he becomes one who contends with God, and not one who deceives. And at that point, he actually has a kind of reconciliation, which is not what we expect. It doesn't come the way we expect, but he reconciles with the one he deceived through this brother. It's beautiful. The man-child character, age without maturity. The immature adult who looks grown up but acts childish, perhaps in all the worst ways. Anybody work with this person? So Prince John here, Radar and Mash. You guys remember Radar? Radar is the same archetype. When he leaves Korea, if you remember the last episode of that show, even though it was 40 years ago or whatever, or no, it's a while ago, Radar's character is sent back to the States while everybody else is in surgery, I think, so they don't get to say goodbye to him. He's just gone. He gets on the chopper and leaves. And when they get out of surgery and they're all weary, they go back into where he's staying next to the radio. Can anybody picture this? Mm-hmm. You better remember what was on his cot? His teddy bear. Yeah. He's no longer a man-child. He went to Lauren Road. Right? Very simple ways of storytelling, and even archetypes can change. They can change. How about the dummy character? Maturity without intelligence. So you recognize Forrest Gump here. One of the powerful things about archetypes is that they allow you to ask questions and explore aspects of humanity that are not really accessible in any other way. And it's often because of this contradiction, X and not X. How is it that some of the best lines in the film, the most wisdom, comes from the dumbest guy in the movie, the central character? When they're on a walk and he's with Jenny, right? Forrest is with Jenny early on, and she starts throwing rocks in the windows of the house where she grew up and was abused by her father. You better remember Forrest Gump's line. She breaks down and starts crying. He says, "Sometimes there just aren't enough rocks." Does that feel like something a person who is maybe not very smart would say? Corrie ten Boom has one of her books. It's been a long time since I read it. I remember telling the story when she worked with Down syndrome children as a teacher, a Sunday school teacher. She said sometimes these children would say the most profound things. She asked them one day, "Do you know what the difference is between a priest and a prophet?" And one of them said, "A priest stands with his back to the people and his face to God, and a prophet stands with his back to God and his face to the people." Yeah. That's pretty human. Does that feel like a contradiction? So when Forrest Gump says, "I'm not very smart," or "I'm not a smart man, but I know what love is." Do you remember that line from this movie? The power of that line is the contradiction. The dumb guy is really the most wise guy of all. And he never stops being the dumb guy. Right? I made so much money, I just kept blowing those loans for free. It just makes you laugh, right? You go, well, he likes it. Why shouldn't he do it? Is that dumb or is that wise? So the movie is constantly making us ask that question. Wait, is that dumb or is that wise? And because you have to think about it. Is it dumb, right? So the archetype is there for a reason. And then we have one of my favorite archetypes, the robot archetype, which is really a very old archetype. It's not something that just came into being 30 or 40 years ago. Jewish literature has this tradition of the golem. You guys know the golem? It comes to life because it has a magic scroll baked into its head. What brings life to the lump of clay? The words. Words bring the lump of clay to life. Right? Or you can say the word brings the lump of clay to life. There's a really deep pattern in there. The robot character is, so I have a long history with this one. This is a reboot of Lost in Space. Anybody seen the reboot of Lost in Space? Anyone seen the original Lost in Space? Oh, even more hands. Ranger Will Robinson. I love that show growing up as a kid. I was like, I want to be Will Robinson. I want the blaster. I want the jetpack. I want the robot. I want all the things. I want Jupiter. I don't care. Abandoned civilization. Doesn't matter. Get me on that Jupiter 5 and send me out. Sadly, life did not work out that way. Such a letdown. Humanity without autonomy. Contradiction? Can you be human if you're not autonomous? So the reality is that most robot characters end up acting in autonomous ways. But they don't lose their robotishness. So Baymax in Big Hero 6 is a robot archetype. Are you satisfied with your character? What does he do at the end of Big Hero 6 when the astronaut is stranded out in the void space or whatever? Do you guys remember this? You've seen Big Hero 6? And the main character, the protagonist, the hero, whose name is Hero, goes with Baymax to get back, because we don't leave anybody behind, right? So the boy who rejected community and just wanted technology, and then embraces technology and community by the end of the story, says we can't even leave the unknown person behind. We have to go get that person. And they go get that person, but Baymax can't make it back. They can't make it back together, so Baymax is the method of their escape. And his last line, so his defining act is self-sacrifice. And his last line is, are you satisfied with your care? All right. I would like to spend a little bit more time on a few more of the cards that are in your head. A few more of these cards, because I think if we dive into them a little bit at a time, it might make more sense to you how you can use this idea when you're creating stories. Exploring internal contradictions and not having to think, I have to create a whole new person, or I'm just going to let the actor do that. Don't do either of those things, right? Yes, you need to leave things up to the actors, but you need to put in your scripts, and you need to try to capture on film something of the internal contradictions that make us human. Cyrano de Bergerac, Samson, King David. This is art without peace. Someone who lives parallel lives of creation and destruction. Is this a common inner conflict? I think it is. Imagine a soldier tasked with killing who begins to long for something more healing, a way to nurture life rather than end it. Can you picture a character like that? If it gives you a story idea and you create a character like that, that card is in our heads. That's in our heads. You ever saw the movie Man on Fire? Very violent. I watched it one time. Denzel Washington's a great actor. I love the way he portrayed that. And there's actually a line in there from one of the Mexican police chiefs when he's going on this rampage, destroying the child trafficking industry, to get back the one kid that was kidnapped from under when he was trying to protect them. But he himself is basically a trained killer. I think he's like a former CIA operative or something in this. It's an action movie. And the Mexican police are looking at all the chaos. And the Mexican police chief says, what does he say? The artist is about to create his magnum opus. I think that's in line, something like that. Warrior poet. Or imagine an artist whose work is dismissed, so his genius turns to destruction and becomes a thief, or a drug dealer, or a terrorist. That art is right there. If you can convey those two things. How about Samson in the Bible, who neglected his artistic spiritual side, violated all three of his Nazirite vows, and it was the least of them. Just don't cut your hair. It was the least of them, the last straw in his somewhat lawless life. That was the unraveling of the thing. You guys know the story of Samson? You know, he's not supposed to ever consume grapes or wine. He's not supposed to sleep around. And he's not supposed to cut his hair. Violates the first two and doesn't lose his strength, but it's the third one. And this is the creepiest line in the Old Testament, in my humble opinion, is what happens when he finally gives in, he admits what it is. Yeah, if somebody cuts my hair. And then, hey, Samson, your enemies are upon you. And he goes outside to thrash them as before. But the Spirit of the Lord had left him, and he didn't know it. Do you know the Holy Spirit doesn't slam the door on the way out? That should be kind of scary. Okay, another one worth exploring. They're all worth exploring, by the way. We wouldn't have time to go through every one of these, but you can figure them out. You can do this. The outlaw character, Robin Hood, Batman, Zorro, are these all the same character? In a sense. Hey, here's King David again. Right? Morality without law. Where does law get its legitimacy? Is Robin Hood lawless? Or is he just following a different law? Now, I think that's the idea. He's not lawless. It's not that he's for chaos. It's that he's for the poor, the oppressed, those who are being abused by the law. So he stands outside the law to try to reform it. Batman gets money legally and uses it to exact justice illegally. So is the vigilante ever right? These are questions you can ask through a script. David and Saul is one of my favorite ones. David acts like a king before he has a crown. One of the points of that story, in my opinion. It's one of the things that God uses. So Saul gets elevated quickly. He has all the things people think they want in a king. David begins in obscurity and remains in a sense being pushed against from different sides. And there's a place where he is, he's defending Israel and its borders. He's defending people from raiders, right? You guys know this story where the Philistines are attacking. He takes his men. He's got all the people you would pick for the story, right? Those who are depressed and in debt. And what's the other word? What's the other word? Discontented, yes. That's who God sends in. Discontented, the depressed, and the dead. He sends in these guys. Here you go, here's some guys. They're not even, some of them aren't even Israelites. And David's like, wait, this town is getting attacked. And he goes and he saves the town. And then Saul hears about it. And Saul's like, wait, David's there? Let's go kill David. Saul couldn't be bothered to save the town. But he did bring, I think, 10,000 men to try to get David. Right? And so David, of course, thought, well, hey, I just saved these people. They'll protect me, right? Right, God? They'll protect me, right? What's the Lord say? No, they're actually going to turn you over. Nope. They'll turn you over in New York minute. You better leave. Really fascinating thing there is if you look at, it says after that, so David and his 600 men left. What happened? He came with 400. 200 people went, that's the real king. That is the real king. What did David get out of it? 200 guys. And he showed he's the real king. Though he doesn't have the crown yet. Does that make sense? This character is similar to another, I put it on a separate part if I have time. The rogue character, Han Solo. Honor without allegiance, but not without friends. That's that character. Where's your allegiance? This is the Ronin character from Japanese culture. This is one of my favorites too, the minstrel or the bard or the scope. So this is really, really, really old. Homer's Odyssey and Iliad originated as parts of the tradition of the rhapsodes, the poets who would stand up and they would just recite story. That was, you go to movie night and you're listening to a guy tell you the story in dactylic hexameter, memorized. Everybody's like, oh, dactylic hexameter, that's awesome. It's dactylic hexameter. The Iliad is 10,000 lines long. The Odyssey is 12,000 lines long. These guys had it. If Homer, scholars argue this, I think most of them are saying they think Homer really existed. He was one of these guys. He had all that memorized. And they would arrange it based on the audience. They would, how long it needed to be, they would compose it in front of them. Now, it was all memorized, so they would use sections in certain places, but if they meant, I need to speed this up, I'm going to leave out scenes 47B and 59C and all, right? They're composing right there in front of you. But the idea is that they are telling you a story, not just for your entertainment, but for some other reason. And this is one of my favorite pictures of this is the poet whose name we don't know, the person who composed Beowulf. So the only copy we have, one copy from about the year 1000, right before the year 1000, J.R.R. Tolkien believed that it was at least 300 years older than that it was composed sometime in the 600s, 700s, somewhere around in there. I think I'm getting those dates correct. The story of Beowulf, has anyone read Beowulf? Oh, fantastic, this is great. Okay, so 3 monsters, right, and Grendel's mom, and the worm, the dragon, right, on its hoard. In the story, the dragon is, Beowulf is this amazing fighter. Beowulf means glory spear in Anglo-Saxon. He becomes king, and it's after he's killed Grendel and Grendel's mom, demon and demon spawn, basically. And he goes, he reigns as a king for a while, and I think he's about 70 years old when the dragon comes. And the dragon comes because some guy, some schlub, trying to get in good with his feudal lord, just by accident, finds the sleeping dragon's hoard, and he steals a cup. And the dragon wakes up, and he steals one thing from the dragon, it knows, right? Does this sound familiar? Someone stealing a cup from the dragon's hoard, the dragon wakes up. Did you know that in Beowulf that he takes 12 guys plus the thief? Yeah, and the dragon wakes up and he goes and starts burning down villages. And so Beowulf's like, we got to take out that dragon. But here's the thing that Beowulf departs from the Hobbit. I should say the Hobbit departs from Beowulf. In the story of Beowulf, it really isn't a compelling reason for Beowulf to go after the dragon, because the dragon has gone back to his hoard. And Beowulf's like, I can't let this go by. And so, do you really need to go after the dragon? You're like 70 years old. Now, it's one thing to go after Grendel or Grendel's mom. It's another thing to go after a dragon. Dragon is ancient imagery. Leviathan in the Bible, in my opinion, it's a sea dragon. It's the sea dragon in Revelation. It's representative of a lot of things. But you go after a dragon and you are bringing a lot of harm on yourself. Because humans are not equipped to take out a dragon. We're just not. So Beowulf goes with his trusted, his best lords, the guys from his mead hall. And he has one guy named Wiglaf, who remains faithful to him. As they're going into the dragon's lair, the other men-at-arms that are his faithful men say, we just can't do it. Nobody takes out a dragon. We can't go to our deaths. And Wiglaf says, what kind of men are you? You've sworn allegiance to him. You've drank his mead. You ate his bread. You took his gold bracelets. And you're going to leave him now? I'd rather die with him than be out here, he goes. So Wiglaf, whose name means remnant of valor, goes in with Glory Spear to attack the dragon. And they kill the dragon, but in the process, of course, the dragon also mortally wounds Beowulf. Because the king, Glory Spear, got the glory, but he couldn't keep his life. And so Beowulf tells them, make a big funeral pyre, like a Viking pyre by the sea where it can be seen. Pile up some of the stuff to send with me off to the next life and set me on fire. And I don't have it memorized. There's this beautiful exposition. Seamus Haney's version of Beowulf is worth reading. It's fantastic. Says something like, a Yeat woman, and looking at the fire gives this prophetic thing of terror and dismay, because what's going to happen is our enemies are going to hear about this, how his men abandoned him, the king everybody feared, Beowulf, is gone, and now we're all going to be led into slavery and abasement. And the next line is, heaven swallowed the smoke. Really powerful stuff. Now think about this as the bard. The bard is making his living. The minstrel is going around, the guy who composed this, but also every bard throughout history is doing something like this. They're going from mead hall to mead hall, talking to knights and barons and dukes, and maybe an earl or two if they can get it. That's great work. You might get paid really well to get in a big mead hall like that. But basically, you're moving around. You are homeless, and yet you're representing the best of what home represents. And so you go and you tell this story of Beowulf, and what is it you're doing? You are subverting the feudal system, not in a malicious way, but in a way that basically says, look, most of you guys are not noble, you are thugs. You can't say you're not noble, you're a thug to a king or a duke or a knight. You can have your head cut off without any repercussions, right? You can't say that. So you tell them a story about the best king ever. Beowulf, what a great king, right? Wouldn't you want to be like him? Look at how he handled Grendel. Look at how he handled Grendel's mom. Look, he went after a dragon, and guess what it did to him? Killed him and destroyed his people. What kind of king do you want to be? What kind of knight do you want to be? That's the subversive power of story. Makes you want to be something better. And it warns you against doing the thing. Don't pursue your own glory. It will destroy you. The dragon will destroy you. Don't do this. Beowulf pits his own strength versus the dragon. We learn that the glory of a king is not worth the cost. And then in The Hobbit, Tolkien comes along and he says, okay. Who's going to kill the dragon in The Hobbit? Is it the king?
No.
It's who?
Bard.
Bard? Bard. It's Bard. The minstrel kills the dragon. You know that's what happens in the Bible? In Isaiah, how does Leviathan get cut into pieces? prophecy. With his sword, with his great and terrible sword, he will destroy Leviathan, the coiling serpent, the gliding serpent. He will slay the monster of the deep with his sword. What's his sword? The word. Yeah. Yeah. Humans are not capable of taking out dragons. If you want to kill a dragon, what you need is the word. These are subtle patterns. You see the subtlety of this? This is, and I'm not making this up. Tolkien knew mythology. He knew what he knew what he was doing. The really interesting thing about this to me is that it's essential that a minstrel not have a home. This is part of this, right? Heart without home, because wandering speaks of the restlessness and conflict that's going on. He's driven to make home safe for others, but not himself. If the minstrel has a home that he is safe in, then he will no longer be driven and no longer a minstrel. Minstrels who are safe at court are called
Jester.
fools. They're called fools because they're serving at the pleasure of the king, right? So I try very hard to not be political because I hate politics, but I think that when you have news that is aligned totally with whoever's in power, that you risk shifting from minstrel to fool, right? Because you are actually now, instead of afflicting the comfortable and comforting the afflicted, you're afflicting the afflicted and comforting the comfortable, because you can't be safe at court if you're telling the court what it doesn't want to hear, right? The minstrel can get away with it through a story, as long as they are weaving the story in such a way that it takes the duke or the earl or the knight a while to figure it out and wrestle with it, because they're gone. They're off to the next thing, right? All right, the Temptress. This is a big one. Morgana Le Fay, Calypso in the Odyssey, the Witches of Narnia, the Serpent in Eden, Pleasure at the Price. If you've ever read the Odyssey, one of the odd things about the Odyssey is this: how long it takes Odysseus to get back home after the war for Troy. And part of it's because he is kept as a love slave by Calypso, the goddess, which means Calypso is eponymous or hidden. And she actually she offers him eternal life. Like, I will make you a full-fledged god. It's not a trick, the way the last human was tricked into thinking they were going to become a god because they were promised eternal life, but they just didn't die. They kept like shrinking and they became a cicada. In Greek mythology. She's like, no, you're going to remain fully you. I love you. I want you. I want you to be my love slave on this tropical island, right? And Odysseus is like, I want to spend the rest of my mortal life with my wife. I want to be with you. Now there's a message in that, right? There's a message in that. The temptress is offering, or tempter is offering empty pleasure. Gawain. I'm not sure what else to call this. Has anyone here read Gawain and the Green Knight? The medieval poem? Oh, you guys are awesome. It's amazing. I call it this because Gawain, when he accepts the challenge from the Green Knight that he beheads in Arthur's court, and the Green Knight's like, hey, I'll make a deal with you. Well, some of you know the story. I don't have time to do the whole thing here, but at the end of the story, when Gawain goes to offer his own neck to be cut by the Green Knight a year later, and he makes one little compromise, one small compromise, in not giving back this green girdle or sash or belt that was supposed to make him immortal. He's intending to return it the next day after he faces the Green Knight who's going to cut off his head, he thinks. But he's like, hey, I have this, maybe it'll protect me. And the Green Knight basically gives him a little nick on the neck and says, I know, like, I wouldn't have nicked you at all, but you didn't actually give back the green girdle that you promised to give back. But I also know you only did it to save your life. So it's a small thing, but it's a real thing. And Gawain is like ashamed. deeply, distressingly ashamed because he didn't keep his word. And he says, I will carry this basically for the rest of my days as a reminder of my failure. But when he gets back to court, King Arthur's knights are like, what a cool story, we're all going to wear a green sash too. They're not carrying it as a reminder of their own failure and acknowledgement of their own capacity to do wrong. They're carrying it as a symbol of pride. Does this remind you of anything? I think the medievals had the same problem in church that we have. We have a lot of people who are not aware of their own capacity to do evil. We have a lot of people who are just wanting to be on a team, and they haven't wrestled with their own need for Savior. I'm up here like we have a pulpit. I have 3 more minutes, right? This really quickly. So the mage, wisdom without honor, again, also a good example of this. Daniel in the Bible, Dr. Strange, Boethius, if you ever read The Consolation of Philosophy. Wisdom is not honored in the story in this archetype because it isn't honored in real life, in my opinion. I think that's why. Humans don't really honor it the way we think we do. And the royal peasant might be the most important one. Aragorn, King Arthur, again, David is in there, Odysseus, Cinderella, and Jesus. Right. Royalty without authority. The ruler who walks about in disguise in order to escape the prison of court intrigue or to await his restoration. In Odysseus, coming back in disguise is the way he rescues the island of Ithaca. He's the true king of Ithaca, but he rescues the island by posing as a poor, homeless beggar that all of the suitors for his wife, who think he's dead, despise. So they don't recognize he's the only one who can actually bend the bow of us all. And when he turns the bow on them, they all panic. Right? Ah, it's Odysseus. And he actually has drawn the bow. And he's pointing it at me. Okay, a minute and a half. Mythopoeia. This is for all you super nerds out here. Mythopoeia is myth making. It was really important to the Inklings. If you love C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien, you could do worse than to do a little bit of a dive into what they meant when they talked about mythopoeia, myth making, and why they thought it was essential to reaching the culture. Why did their works continue to impact people today? Yes, they were brilliant writers and scholars, but they also got this right. They understood the power of myth-making using things like archetypes and classes of experience to speak deeply of the human experience. So when you go to create a script or when you're making a movie, ask yourself, what makes this particular archetype true? How does it show us what humans are like? Why do I want to use this archetype? Is this the right archetype? Or is there a different one? And will it be recognizable? Do I have scenes that will reveal in my story the nature of royalty without authority? Or age without maturity? And then ask, how will the character be relatable? What hidden vulnerabilities can you reveal to create buy-in? Here's one thing you can ask yourself. How might we all be the type in small ways? What would it look like in my life, or in my wife's life, or in my boss's life? Okay, it's 11:30. I think we have to just stop. But I'm happy to answer questions if you have them. Afterwards, I'll just pull this stuff up and I'll be out of the hall. Thank you very much.